Welcome to this online tutorial. The whole aim of this particular tutorial is to ensure that you are where you need to be and that you're able to go off and do the work that you need to do as a group during this week. So the first big assumption is you're in a group. So I noticed there's most probably 3 or 4 people that don't appear to be listed in a group. If you're in that situation, you need to contact me immediately so we can make arrangements to get that sorted. In terms of your group, I know there's a little bit of haven't quite locked in for some of the groups your actual focus area, so that needs to happen now. We're sort of now at the halfway mark of the semester, so it's too late to sort of just keep drifting on and thinking we will or we won't. Lock in your whatever it's going to be. Just view it as a vehicle that's going to help you to get from A to B in this unit. Lock in that context, and now you've got that context. We just need a realistic starting point. So you must have a realistic starting point. Otherwise, you're not really moving from A to B. You're just hovering around in a space. So make sure as a group that you come together and you commit to a particular starting point. Now that could be, depending on the nature of your operation, that could be just a straight turnover thing. We've got a restaurant and we think it turns over 300,000. We heard that on last week. That's fine. No problems at all, because that's a great starting point. Because to get to 1.5 million or $2.5 million in turnover, that's a huge. That's a huge. All right, so it's going to be clearly additional locations, but it's just not going to be tinkering around the edges. Okay, but that's what everyone needs to have. Now, it could be turnover related, or could be the scope and reach of your operations. Okay, I'm quite happy to go that way, especially for those of you who are looking at more social enterprise contexts. All right, but before you do anything this week, lock in a context that you're focused on and lock in a starting position. Okay, so important that you guys have a starting position. You must have that, otherwise your research isn't going to make, it's just going to be ill-directed. All right, so you must have that starting point. You can come back and try to sort of alter aspects of that starting point, but you've got to be guided by a starting point. So lock that in. Once you've got yourselves a starting point, the challenge for you is to sort of say, okay, so if we're here at A and we want to get to B, which is in somewhere between 5 and 10 times the size, what is it that we need to know? So we don't want to jump straight to having a strategy. That's the worst thing that you could do here, is say, so what were those strategies we could use? So you can use the broad strategies that we looked at in week 4, where we were thinking about, is it going to be market penetration? Is it going to be market development? You can think in terms of those very broad strategies, right? So you're adding new product lines to try and increase your market share. Are you adding new customer types or more of the same customer? Okay. Are you going off into entirely new marketplaces, right? It's a bit hard to do in this assignment, but it is possible if you can make the argument that you are leveraging the same resources to do different things, okay? Having got to that position, the challenge for us is not adopting a specific strategy. We need to do the research and we need to understand where our position is before we can actually adopt a strategy, okay? Otherwise, we're just adopting a strategy that seems theoretically like it would make sense and hoping that the context that we're going to be operating in would actually support it. We want to understand the context, and in doing that, we will enable ourselves to have a really stronger footing from which to sort of select a strategy. So you've been given the canvas, the environmental interaction framework canvas, and that is the best place for you to start. I know it may seem like I'm taking you back to old ground, but you need to, we talked about the example of someone wanting to paint a wall, and if you wanted to paint a wall and you want the paint to be able to really be effective, then you need to prime that surface. You need to make sure that you've prepared it so that the paint can stick. And it's no different here in this situation. You need to prime your thinking about your context in order to be able to make the right selection and apply the right strategy. To the extent that you don't understand your context and that you adopt a strategy because it seems to have some sort of logical fit with what you're trying to do, even if it is the right strategy, your arguments for how you would implement that strategy aren't going to hold a lot of water. Okay? So, you've got your social capital and your human capital in the group. And I've implored you to make sure that there's a connection between what you've got and the context that you're studying. So for most of you, you may not have the human capital related to the industry that you're in, but you have social capital that can get you access to that human capital, all right? That can help you to understand the context in a really nuanced way. So make sure you understand what social capital, what human capital, and what resources you would be required to be able to access in order to make this work. Okay? I'm really interested in you guys being able to make sense of the operational environment. So by that, we're not talking about the general environment, the external environment. We're talking about the environment specific to your context. So there's two dimensions to the operational environment: the ecological environment, which relates to all of those factors that are supporting your context, your strategy, your idea, and the selective environment, those factors that are working directly against the nature of your idea. So I want you guys to do the research this week to try and really identify. And obviously the best way to do that is to be able to have conversations with the people who hold that human capital and have that experience in the context that you're trying to work through. So rather than you having to try and play detective and try and deduce things from other elements, if you can go straight to the source, that'll make it so much easier for you. I want you to try and gain a sense of the degree of legitimacy that surrounds this context in general, and more so about what you might be thinking or speculating on at the moment in terms of potential ways. So not necessarily the strategy yet, but ways in which you could achieve a large-scale growth around your business context. Is it? Would you be doing something where there would be socio-political legitimacy in this, to the extent that people are actually going to be sort of saying, "Oh yeah, that would be an appropriate thing to have this business do in society." Really important for the way that you can mount a really strong case to me in your business report is that you can explain the nature of variation, selection, and retention that's been happening in this space. So the nature of change. It's really important that you can demonstrate to me that you understand how other business or similar types of businesses have attempted to either expand or to bring in new variations to their existing practices, and that you can understand how and why those things have or have not succeeded. The nature of the value proposition is a really important one for you guys to understand, because it's really important for you to actually be able to differentiate between a value chain, a value shop, and a value network. So it's really critically important that you can demonstrate you understand which of these and or combinations of these apply to your idea. The reason for that is because you're basically making an argument that through expanding this business context that you can create and capture new value. Now, to make the argument that you can create new value suggests that you understand how value is being created, and therefore you understand how it would be captured. So that's going to require some direct reference to either your conversion of inputs into outputs of high quality value chain, the use of existing resources in different ways to solve different problems, value shop, or your ability to exploit networks and communities, value networks, to be able to create and capture this value. Along the way, I want you also to be mindful of the type of cooperation that might be required across the industry, but with different stakeholders, to enable you to develop some specific coactions through which your growth that you are trying to envisage could be expected to be sustainable. I'm curious for you to try to be able to make sense of the nature of the channels that you currently have that may be conflicted through a process of expansion, or may be required to be duplicated or strengthened as you're going through that process. It's really important that you're able to identify the nature of this end user. So we've always asking that question: what are you selling to whom? It may well be that if going through your expansion that you're going to have more whats and you're going to have more whoms, right? So it's really important that you can understand the nature of this end user, this consumer. Are we talking about one expanding segment in different markets or different regional areas? Are we talking about different end users, so different types of segments that we're now going to be reaching with different types of products? Okay, so again, you've got to try and make that argument that these segments exist and such people would want to be end users. That brings us through to the nature of, is a compelling reason existing? All right, so it's really important that your research can help you to understand the nature to which a compelling reason does exist. All right, I don't need you to get overly concerned with this concern for the strategy of using FUD factors, only to be mindful that the people that you believe you're targeting, the end user segments, would be susceptible to a message that wouldn't, there's a logic to why you think you could activate those people to understand the nature of opportunities. So that's that sort of environmental interaction sort of context. In working your way through that, you should start to also logically make sense of the type of costs that you're not going to be able to avoid. This expansion process is going to cause you to face a series of costs, either related to duplicating physical infrastructure, employing new people, training, other forms of development. So you need to start thinking about what those costs are going to look like. Maybe there are actually opportunities to eliminate certain costs. Maybe at a small level there are things done in-house which, as you work your way through and become a larger entity, you would be able to outsource particular things. So maybe there are some avoidable costs that could be eliminated. All right. You don't need to worry about the initial cost of startup. It's the initial cost of expansion that would be the concern here. And then, of course, inflows. And the issue with the inflows here is not necessarily how much they are. Of course, that's important, but it's when they would be. All right. So we're trying to make sense of, when do you think you would be expecting monies to flow out of your operations to fund expansion, relative to when do you think you would be expecting revenues to come in? And is it a tap that you can just turn on, or are you going to have to sort of slowly develop these revenues as you're moving through? To give you an example of that, if you were a not known brand in a restaurant space and you created a new restaurant, you duplicated one restaurant format and you took it to another area where your brand was relatively unknown, you wouldn't expect to have instant, tables being sold out and a replica of revenues from the previous setting just because you've got. It's not like putting a hotel on a Monopoly table. It doesn't have the equal amount of chance of someone landing on it and paying you a fee. You can imagine if I opened a new McDonald's restaurant in another suburb that hadn't previously had McDonald's, the revenues would be very consistent straight away because everyone knows what McDonald's is, all right? And they're just tapping into the density of that population and the probability that people in there are also going to want to have McDonald's for its convenience. So that balance between outflows and inflows is really important in terms of your modelling, because clearly you're going to have a challenge here where you're going to have a strategy you select that looks fine, and the challenge for you, of course, is to try and make it all add up. So the week itself looks like this. When you come back to class the following week, I want you guys to be able to share with the rest of the class, because remember, it's a workshop, and I want you guys to workshop your ideas. So I need everyone to start coming along to the workshops, all right? We only had 30-odd people there. That's not enough. It's not enough, guys. If you really want to be engaged in this unit, then you've got to come along on the Fridays, all right? They're only going to be fortnightly classes from now on, so there's no reason for you not to be able to sort of arrange so that you can actually get along there on a fortnight and have the other Friday off. Because during that week, I'm looking for you to go off and do this research. But what I'm looking for you to be able to do is in week 7, share with us what are the best opportunities for growth that you sense. Where are those opportunities for you to say, okay, we're going to go from this size to this much larger size, and we think the best opportunity for us is to do it this way. So we're not talking about the strategy yet, we're just talking about the opportunity for growth. You think there are more customers that can be reached. You think you can use more services or different types of products to actually achieve this expansion. In doing that, what do you think are the ecological environment matters or factors that matter the most? All right. So when we think about those factors that are generally supportive of what you're trying to do, which are the ones do you think that will matter the most? Conversely, which of the factors in the selective environment do you think will matter the most as well? So what's going to be the hardest obstacles for you to overcome? What energy is possible for you? All right. So given that we just don't have a blank check that we can just say, okay, just go and expand however you want, and here's the money to pay for it. What energy could you tap into which might help you to offset this? So could it be your own existing brand, right? So people already know about your brand, so you find a way to leverage your own brand to move that forward. You've also got the ability to ensure that you can tap into what governments and other grassroots activities are happening in other communities, that you can find ways to tap into that. And that may be a way of you shifting and shaping the brand and purpose of the existing organisation into either broader or more narrow settings. In thinking about these customers, what do you think is that compelling reason why you think somebody's going? Because clearly there's no much point setting out to expand if you can't demonstrate that there is a compelling reason for this to actually occur. And as I mentioned previously, I want you to explicitly comment on the nature of the value creation logics that will inform the development of your growth. All right. So I want you to tell me, is it about becoming more efficient using a value chain and the conversion of those inputs into outputs? Is it about becoming more effective at using your existing resources and their expansion in being able to solve different problems for different people? And so if I think about the people who are looking at developing a range of services to help people in the community, then that clearly may be the case. And to what extent will you need to rely on value networks to be able to not only tap into but build a larger community? So that's the focus of your research. You really do need, because we're going to be moving along at a fairly rapid rate of knots here, and all of this research is what's going to underpin the production of your report. So it's not going to be good for you if you come in next week and it's like, we haven't got to that yet. If you haven't got to that, you're going to be way behind, and that will obviously reflect through in the nature of how you produce that report. All right. So really important that you make the connection, and as I've said, where in doubt, shift and shape your focus area back to something where you know you have social and human capital that you can reach out to. Okay, that's so important that you're able to talk to people in a context and get really valid. Otherwise, you're chasing around after secondary data from the ABS and other such places and trying to find a way to make it fit your purposes. And while there are occasions when you can do that, and there's a nice little logic that you can create, more often than not, it just is secondary data that could have related to anyone's idea, but you're trying to make the argument, and you're sort of really trying to... You're going through a process of justification that really you don't need if you just went straight to the source and you ask someone, based on your experience in this industry, how have you experienced this? How have you found that? What do you think about this idea? And so on and so on. All right. Any problems at all, then just come back and talk to me. All right. So either drop me a text, send me an email, and we can be talking these things through as we go. All right. Wish you all the best, and I hope your group can come together and gel. And as I said, really important I know there's people who are really stuck for work. They just can't get out of work on Friday afternoons. All right, I get that. But I would be expecting to see, that 60 or so people back in the class who attended the first 2 weeks, back in the class in week 7, to make sure that the workshop process works, because it's designed to help you understand the process that you're engaged in. Because you'll see other groups who will be one step ahead of you, or will have formulated their thinking a little bit better than you have. And by listening to them and understanding them, you'll actually think, yeah, so that's the process we should have completed. Or that's the way we should be explaining this, all right? And it'll make the formation of your report in the coming weeks a much easier process to be completing. Chat to you soon, and if you need to chat to me sooner.